Welcome to the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. As a surviving sibling myself, I knew that I wanted to share my story, my brother's story. I lost my brother to a homicide in November 2016, and after going through this experience, I knew that I wanted to share my story and his story. And now it's your turn to share your stories. Today, I have, of course, another surviving sibling with me. Her name is Julia. Julia, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here. It's a weird thing to say, but nice to have.
It's bittersweet, right? That's what I say, I think, in the beginning of most episodes. I'm so excited to meet another surviving sibling. I'm so excited to have you share your story and be open and raw with us, but meeting under these circumstances is never fun, right?
Exactly.
So
not the best club to be a part of.
No, exactly. It's the worst club ever, for sure. So Julia, if you will, tell us a little bit we're here to talk about your journey and, of course, your beautiful sister, Rihanna. So can you tell us a little bit about your background, your relationship, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I am one of three daughters. So Rihanna is the youngest. I'm the middle child. And then my older sister, Corinda. We grew up in Northern Virginia, so like right outside of DC. My parents, my mom and my dad, they split up, I think when I was preschool, I want to say. So it was something that was normal. I thought it was cool having two houses, I remember. And also, I guess it was strange, like when I had friends that, oh, both your parents live in the same house. That's different. So they split up. My mom got remarried to my stepdad when I was 8. So he's been a part of our lives forever, essentially. So yeah, I mean, my parents, I will say they did a really good job co-parenting. They split custody, even though my mom and my dad's relationship was very tumultuous. My dad was a big drinker. He was an alcoholic. He was physically, verbally abusive to my mom, and also, verbally, not so much physical abuse with us. But just a very loud dude. And my parents lived pretty much our whole lives 2 blocks from each other. So I think it was very easy for us to, one says no, okay, just gonna go to dad's house, or dad said no, gonna go to mom's house. So yeah, that was kind of our, I guess, upbringing. I mean, I guess family wise. And yeah, I'm trying to think.
Yeah, I just have to jump in because I'm a product of divorce too. And so it was actually really ironic because I was speaking to my youngest sister last night and she was talking about a situation, with her own friend and dealing with their kids. And it's interesting because her and I were like, yeah, it's totally normal. Like when you're young to be like, oh, mom says no, I'm going to go to dad. So we were just talking about that last night. I think a lot of people, you guys will connect with that, I'm sure. It's being a product of divorce is a common thing these days, unfortunately. But so that sounds tough. I can relate to a lot of your story already with that. And I'm one of 3 girls as well, but I had a brother, of course,
Yes.
But so tell us a little bit about your relationship with Rihanna. What was that like? So she's the baby. So what was that like in your kind of you guys growing up, and kind of bring us into, obviously the years we're going to talk about where she struggled. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think all 3 of us, right? Like me and my 2 sisters, all 3 of us definitely played our roles to a T. Corinda, she's still, you just look at her and you can tell she's the older child. Just very logical and let's think about this. Let's make a plan.
Yes.
The steps we're going to take to get there. I'm sort of more of the, all over the place, typical middle child, felt, slighted and didn't really have, sort of the little person years because Rihanna and I are 21 months apart. So she came pretty quick after me. So I think, me being the middle child and having a baby come in so soon was probably something to do with the strange relationship me and my mother have had my entire life, maybe. Maybe. And then Rihanna, the baby, kind of gets away with everything, you know, makes mistakes, but it's okay. It's gonna be fine.
Well, it's like because
um,
your parents have already been through it before, so they're like, okay, it's fine. It's not a big deal." Like, I'm the
yeah,
oldest, so, like, when the oldest goes through it, it's like the end of the world, you know?
yeah,
So, yeah, you're right. The baby gets away with everything, for sure.
yeah, yeah. Corinne does like all of her, teenage year things that she went through. And then I think my parents felt more prepared when I went through it and really kind of pushed the limits a lot of times as a teenager, me. And then I
Mhm.
think with Rihanna, they were like, well, she's not as bad as Julia was. So, it's fine.
Yeah. I think a lot of people can relate to that, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, yeah, and the order and you had her come along so quickly afterwards, it's kind of all you've known is having a younger sister, right, as well,
Yeah.
um, so
Yeah,
quick
and I mean, in our relationship, I mean, the 3 of us, we I think very typical sisters, like, we had our good days and we had our bad days, but at the end of the day, like, we were always there for each other, that's for sure. I might be able to make fun of my little sister, but, if anybody else does it, like, we're gonna have problems.
Oh, yeah, for
So,
sure.
I
Yeah,
think we've all always been, very good defenders of each other and just supportive of each other, so
yeah, yeah, I can relate, definitely. Yes. Yeah, I think that's a common thing among siblings, and especially, like, the sisterly bonds too, when it's like, I can steal your clothes and pull your hair and say whatever I want about you, but no one else better touch you or do anything to you, right? Yeah.
yeah.
I connect with that. So, tell us a little bit about what's transpired with Rihanna because we on this episode are obviously going to talk about her overdose and that's a really difficult topic, but a lot of our listeners, a lot of you guys will relate to this story, Julia, and it's an important one to talk about. And it's always interesting to hear kind of how someone evolves down this path, right? And some of us, make it through recovery, we make it to the other side. Some of us have, unfortunate, stories like this. So I'm curious if you could kind of walk us through Rihanna's journey and your experience as her sister.
Yeah, yeah, like I mentioned, I had some pretty off years as a teenager, so probably didn't set the best example. I personally just have never been a drug user, that just has never been my thing. When I was a teenager, it was, I was drinking with friends, I was out partying late, like that sort of thing. Um, and, with Rihanna, I mean, so Rihanna, she, very loud, outspoken, friendly, loyal, like most loyal friend you could probably have. She had a very tight knit group of girlfriends. They called themselves the Gills, so girl without an R.
Why? Did
So
you ever ask her why? Like, that's an interesting nickname.
yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah. It's really
Uh,
cool when I like have you guys on because it makes and, like, it's interesting when I go on other shows too because people ask me questions, I'm like, "Actually, I never thought of that before." Like,
yeah,
why did they do that? Or why did they call themselves that, right? So, yeah,
to
that's
be
cute though.
and to be honest with you, yeah, I'll have to ask her friend Courtney, because I'm very close with her friend Courtney,
Mhm.
still to this day. But yeah, I kind of always thought that it was just I don't know somebody just misspelled girl and then they just kind of went with it because that was just kind of
Yeah.
the girls they were. But yeah, so she kind of had this really tight knit group of girlfriends, five of them. Um, and yeah, I mean she was a really good friend. She didn't care much for like school or like really attention to detail. She lacked a lot of like common sense, like street smarts, if you will. But she did okay in school and went through school fine. And I think she started, doing the typical high school partying with friends, um, drinking, maybe smoking marijuana. I'd never really heard of anything, her doing any harder drugs, um, until she was like out of high school. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think she, I think she kind of struggled a little bit too with just like self-esteem. And again, she had this close knit group of friends, but I think sometimes she, kind of worried about how she was perceived. And, I remember her telling me stories of like, oh, this person was mean to me, or this person started a rumor about me. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of people, I think she kind of used alcohol and drugs sort of as, that like social lubricant, if you will. Um, so she got into college at VCU in Richmond, Virginia Commonwealth University. Um, she went there and she didn't really have much of an idea, I think at first, like really what she wanted to do. Um, it was like interesting because um, I, and I'm not sure if this is correct, but I feel like she was sort of maybe wanting to take the track that like our older sister had taken. Our older sister was also at VCU. Um, and then at some point, like maybe 2 years in, she decided to go change her major to social work, which is what I had done. So I had like my bachelor's and master's in social work. And I thought it was like adorable. I was like, oh, like sister, you're gonna
Of course.
follow in my footsteps. It's
Yeah.
very, very cute. I remember like having the conversation with her too. Like, you can do whatever you want to do, right? Like you don't have to, you know, not copy, your sisters or whatever, but like make sure it's what you really want to do.
Right, like, make sure if you're doing it, you're inspired by me and, like, you want me to mentor you in that kind of way, but don't do it just because, like, "Okay, she did it, so this is the right thing to do." That's a good big sister talk for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think she liked it. I think Rihanna, she was really good with kids. Um, I wouldn't necessarily have like trusted her with children at that time, but she was like then she's just like a very playful person, like I remember her going on these mission trips with our church when I don't know, probably middle school with her best friend Rachel. And they did a lot of activities with kids and like these pictures. And it's like, oh my gosh, like you have this like maternal aspect to these pictures. And she always joke like, yeah, 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 no thanks, no kids right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, I think like I said, experimented in high school and then went to VCU. Again, like our older sister was there living off campus in her own apartment with her friends. And I think they were only at school together for a year or so. I want to say before my older sister graduated. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think VCU, Richmond, I don't know if you're familiar, but it had the rap, right, for like drug use and partying and that sort of thing.
We hope you're enjoying this incredible episode of the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. We'll be back in just a minute after hearing from our incredible sponsor. Are you feeling lost in your grief journey? Perhaps even stuck? As a surviving sibling, I too have felt lost, stuck, confused, angry. Well, fill in the blank. I've felt so many emotions along my grief journey. I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about too. Along the way, I found that what I needed was answers to all of my unanswered questions, validation, permission to feel everything that I was feeling at different times, and ultimately, I needed guidance. That's why I created the Grief Guide for Surviving Siblings. This is a 23-page guide that guides you, the surviving sibling, along your grief journey. Written and created by a surviving sibling for surviving siblings. Click the link in the show notes to get your copy or visit thesurvivingsiblings.com, where you can also find more show information, merchandise for surviving siblings like you, and more resources and support.
This is also like kind of right around like her kind of like rave, sort of dubstep days, if you will,
Mhm.
like festivals, that kind of thing. So I think, she and her friends were sort of starting to experiment, right, with things that were outside the sort of normal scope of just like drinking or just smoking marijuana or whatever. So, and I think she did a really good job too of like you know, not making it her complete image, right? Like that, I think it was very sort of like a private thing, right? She did with like specific friends, at specific places, specific parties. I don't think, and again, I don't know, I don't think she was an everyday user. At least I don't think so. I don't really know because she didn't really disclose that. And again, if she was using every day, she was doing a very good job of hiding that from me. Because again, me and my older sister, Corinna, we were all very close. I mean, especially once we kind of got past high school and we were in college. And when I graduated college, like we were just forming that adult, you know,
Yes, I think
friendship
a lot of
relationship.
people relate to that, Julia, because
Yeah.
when you leave the house and you leave the dynamics of like middle school, high school, and like where you're having to share a school or maybe friends or like, you create more of your own identity. And I think that makes it easier in some ways to kind of reconcile anything from the past and also move forward. And like you have your own identities, even if you are going to the same school or something, like still you have your own friend groups, you're in different places. Like beginning of college is totally different than the end of college, to your point, right? With both your sisters being, it's just different, right? Different experience.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, it's interesting because this is kind of a common story of how it starts, right? Like you go and you've experimented and then you start to get into these types of lifestyles. And I'm, I'm like you, Julia. I was not like a good kid. I was definitely a drinker. I definitely did drugs in high school. I definitely did things. And then it was weird when I went to college, that all stopped. But I've watched a lot of people progress. I drank a lot in college. I mean, I went to a party school too, so yeah. But like they did. But I think it's fascinating because you watch people that sometimes dabble in high school, and then once they get to college, away from kind of parents or any supervision, um, that's when things can start to happen. And like you said, you guys were able to, continue a great relationship, but you're also living your individual life. So you're not really sure what's going on. So did you know what type of drug use was happening? Did you know what she was doing? I mean, typically I remember, when I went back to raves and stuff like back in the day, it was ecstasy, cocaine, things like that. But that evolved, like now it's a totally different ball game. I mean, it's anything from, meth to, I mean, it's all over the place. And obviously fentanyl is the big thing today, right? That's happening. So
Yeah.
do you know what she was using or what was going on, or did that just come to light later?
Yeah, I mean, so mainly it came to light later. I mean, there were a lot of like just questionable circumstances, like and just with social media becoming what it came, like, she would, I'd get like Snapchat, I remember like the last year that she was alive. We haven't gotten into this yet, but like I had moved to Chicago, right? So I wasn't even anywhere close to home. She was back home living with my parents in Northern Virginia. But yeah, I mean, I would get Snapchats of just like videos where it's just like not there, I mean, I don't know. So I could always speculate, like, okay, she's clearly taking a benzo or it's like Xanax or something along those lines, and she had disclosed to me before that, she'd tried ecstasy, she'd tried cocaine, with friends and, oh, we just tried it. And I'm like, okay, that's a slippery slope. Like, be careful. Um, so, but yeah, I mean, nothing, um, I mean, according to her, like, and when I would drill her and ask her questions, it was never like hard stuff like heroin or meth or anything like that. But, it's more like pills and that type of thing. So,
Right. Right. Which aligns with her going to like festivals and things like that because I lived that scene a long time ago, like 20 years ago. Really dating myself. But now, like everything that goes on now, I'm like, God, it's just so scary. Like I thank God all the time. I'm like, oh gosh, because it was a different world back then. I don't want to say it was safer to experiment, but there wasn't the things going around then that there are now. So walk us through that. So you moved to Chicago, so that's part of your journey. But she leaves college and she goes home. She moves home with your parents, right? That's kind of what happens.
yeah. Yeah. So, and I was like kind of going through like just in my head, like trying to remember like certain details. But yeah, so um 2014, the year before she passed, she, like I said, she had just switched her major recently to social work. And with social work, your, junior or senior year, you have a field placement. So it's essentially like an unpaid job, but like you have to go and you have to do it. Like it's part of your credits for the program.
Right.
And so I remember she had this practicum and she had just started it. I think it was like a school or a school program. It was something with kids. Um, and I don't know, the first she gave us was that she was there one day and I guess like the boss left like early or something. And Rihanna was supposed to stay until whatever time. And I guess the boss person or the person in charge had left and Rihanna just decided to leave. And then I guess, I don't know if it was the same day or next day, they found out. And so she was terminated from her practicum, which, is, not abnormal. I mean, she probably could have tried to like appeal or, find another practicum. But anyways, um, so yeah, because of that, she essentially, and again, I can't recall exactly, but whether she was asked to leave the program or if she was kicked out of the social work program at VCU, but whatever it was, she left school. And yeah, she moved back in to my mom and stepdad's house, like our childhood home that we had grown up in. Um, so she was back in, Arlington living, got a job at like a local brewery, food place. And so she was really just kind of working part-time. And, I think, I don't know, her words were just like, I'm just trying to get my life back together.
Right.
And I think her ultimate goal was to um, get to a place where she could transfer her credits from VCU to like go to the local college here. Um, that I don't think really ever panned out, but like that was sort of her like plan. Like this is what's gonna happen, like soon, someday soon. Um, so, so yeah, I mean, she was just like living at my parents. And I think my mom, tried to place certain restrictions and things on her to sort of like keep her in line and like, can't just live here for free, like you still need to be a responsible adult. Um, so I don't know. My mom always had this weird rule, like if you move back in as an adult, like you're gonna have a curfew again, which like,
I've
you
heard
know,
of that. I've heard of that from parents before. Yeah, I've heard of that.
yeah,
Hmm.
like, and my mom's always said that it's just like I guess, what is it like? You're not living here, then I don't have anything to worry about. But if you're living here, then I know what time you're coming in, and I'm worried about you.
I mean, I kind
So,
of
which
get
I
it.
get it. Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. And also it's your house, right? It's
Yeah.
your house. And, if your parents go to bed at a certain time and they don't, I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think they just struggled a lot with that because, I think Grana just wasn't really
I'm sure she
respecting
wasn't
that.
following the rules, right, Julia?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
she getting in with like, because she's working, but she's kind of, I mean, when you go through something like that, and I'm sure a lot of you guys listening have been through that or had a sibling or someone, we've all gone through those transitional periods. Sometimes you just feel lost. You feel a little
Yeah.
lost. And I'm sure that's what she was going through.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and going back to like her really good girlfriends, like the Gills, I think most of them, were local and back home. I think a couple of them, they were like still in college. It was taking them a little bit longer than, um, you know, just the straight 4 years or whatever. So,
Right.
she did kind of have those like support people around. But, I think a lot of the people she was hanging out with were, um, semi newer friendships, that were, I don't think the most positive thing in the world, right? I mean, people that are supplying her with different kinds of drugs, oh, let's test this out, type of thing. So, um, yeah, I mean, she got close, I think, with just too many people that, either were dealing drugs or, using them regularly. So I think that sort of just became, a regular kind of thing for her. But again, she, definitely was hiding it very well. I mean,
Right. You would just see a snapshot here and you're like, you don't look like yourself. You look a little checked
right.
out. Like, so
Hmm.
and she's living at home and meanwhile she's hanging out with these people. And I think this is probably a really important part of your story and Rihanna's story is, if you think something, it's probably happening, right? So it's, hindsight's always 2020,
Yeah.
but if you see those signs, which you were seeing some of them, I think that's the hard part. That's the really hard part about drug use, right? Is people
Yeah.
tend to hide it. So kind of start walking us like up to the day when all of this happened, because she's obviously using, and you guys, aren't really sure what it is, and you're in Chicago at this time, right? So tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about, kind of walk us up to that experience, the horrible day that you lost Rihanna.
Yeah, yeah. So my husband and I, we moved to Chicago in April 2014. Um, the holidays, Christmas, big deal in my family, like just big deal. And I could not imagine, like, I think leading up to it, I was like, it's fine. Like, we'll do a Chicago Christmas here, me and my husband. It'll be great. But like kind of going up to Christmas, I was like, no, this doesn't feel right.
You
So
changed your mind, yeah.
yeah. So we me and my sisters concocted this whole plan where, Dan and I were my husband and I were gonna fly home for Christmas and like surprise my mom. Because my mom was also just like so sad that I was not gonna be like it was gonna be my first Christmas away from home.
Yeah.
So yeah, we, did that. We flew home, we surprised my mom, it was adorable. And then my husband and I, we stayed at my parents' house, um, while we were visiting and seeing friends and catching up with people, whatever. And yeah, New Year's. So, and I had always, I mean, at this point, Rihanna had left college, the athlete, whatever it was. I can't remember. I think it was before or right after. At some point before, she had like just totaled her car, which was like super concerning to me. Um, and I know my parents were concerned too, but I think they were just sort of, it's like, what else can we do? And, I understand and can see that frustration. And I mean, my two daughters are much younger right now, but I know it's coming.
Yep.
So, we stayed there over Christmas and then it's New Year's Eve. My husband and I, we went to a friend's party, like came home like shortly after midnight, came back, and my parents were up still. Rihanna was like sitting on their couch and like, she like, I thought maybe she was just tired, maybe she drank a little too much. But then like she was very clearly like just like nodding off. Like I know what that looks like, right? And so I like said that to my parents. I was like, hey, like what's going on over here? Anybody else see this? They're like, am I crazy? And they sort of were just like, oh, like it's fine. She was just at a party with our friends. Leave her alone, don't let out, like that kind of thing. Because I was just very like hyper vigilant about that stuff. So that sort of continued on. I was very concerned. Like I kept telling my husband, like we didn't have a car there. I was like, I don't know. I'm like worried because I don't know what she's taken. The hospital's like down the street. Like it would be so easy to, even if we had to like get an Uber, which like Uber was a new thing around that time back then.
So
Um,
true, right? To think about that, Uber was new like 10 years, like not even 10 years ago. It's crazy,
yeah,
right?
I know.
Really puts this
um,
like in perspective. So, okay, so you guys are like, is no one like jumping into action with you? Like you're the one that's taking this the most seriously? Like that's frustrating, Julia. Wow.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and it really was frustrating, and it was a huge source of contention, I think, for a very long time. But, for me, sort of my breaking point that night was, she was nodding off. I was like, okay, like, I'm gonna go to sleep, whatever. And then at one point she got up, went down to her room, and I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna follow her. So I followed her downstairs and like in whatever stupor like state she was in, she was literally like trying to crush up whatever pills they were, crush up more pills. And had like a whole little thing, to like snort the drugs and everything. So I'm like watching her and I like take it from her and I'm like, what is going on? Like, I don't know. I sort of went almost like full like mom mode, if you will. Like, I
Of
don't
course.
know.
Yeah.
And I just like, I looked like right to the right of like her desk where that was sitting. And I like, just like looked in her trash can and just saw like baggies and like powder residue, like in the back, like very clear. Like you don't have to be like, a rocket scientist. He to like just kind of look around and see like, okay, like things things are not well here. Like, this is not good.
Yeah.
So anyways, I took, the book with the powder and the stuff upstairs to my parents. And I was like, you guys, like, she just went downstairs and I followed her because I'm worried about her. And I just followed her and she's trying to literally crush up more pills to snort. And my parents are just sort of like, oh, weird. And I'm like, yeah, this isn't like, I'm not like okay with this.
Oh my God, I'm shaking, you guys. What is going on?
Like
Wow.
I'm not really sure like what we're doing here, but like we don't know what these pills are. And fentanyl was just sort of starting to become a thing,
Yep.
right? So there was like a little awareness, but it's nowhere like it is now as far as like the risk
Not
of
at all.
overdosing and
2014, 2015? Absolutely not.
yeah,
No,
like
no.
2015, like in Arlington County, like where we grew up, and Rihanna was still living in Arlington. So, but in 2015, I think there were 2 or 3, like at least reported deaths by overdose, which means Rihanna is one of those like 2 or 3 people.
Risky.
And then 2016, it jumped like like hundreds, like not hundreds, but like 100 something, I believe. I haven't looked at like that data in a while, but yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it just became a complete like epidemic, but yeah, so I was sort of greeted with that, and it was sort of this, you know, what are we gonna do? Like, we're gonna get her in trouble, gonna go to jail, and I was like trying so hard, right? I mean, like at this point, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, right? My parents had been drinking. I had something to drink at the party too that I went to with my husband. Rihanna's over here, like nodding off on we don't know. So I'm just like trying to explain to them, like that's not how this works, right? Like I worked with clients with drug addiction. If you go and seek help at the hospital for drug use, or you think you're overdosing or whatever, you don't get arrested.
Right, they're
Like,
not gonna lock you up, which I think is a
yeah,
really powerful thing for you to share on here too, Julia, so thanks for sharing that because I
yeah,
think that is a reason why a lot and I think it's your parents' story is a story that a lot of us may have about our parents. That was something that happened with especially my mother. She's like, "No, we're not gonna," because my brother struggled with addiction, as most of you guys know. And she would always be like, "No, no, no, we're just gonna keep him at home. Like, we'll just keep things away from him." I'm like, "That's not how it works, Mom. Like, it doesn't work like that. They will go out, they will find ways. You can put these restrictions on, they'll get it at work, they will figure it out, but they're not going to go to
yeah,
jail." So I think that's a really big thing for you to share on here is like, no, like they're looking for people who have committed crimes. They're looking for people that are like giving the drugs out or dealing them. They're not
hmm
going to be like, they want to most of the time. I mean, I know there's bad experiences. I'm not, taking that away from
yeah,
people, but most of the time, like if you're bringing your sister, your brother, or whomever is struggling with addiction somewhere to get help, like their priority is not be like, "We gotta lock you up first because you had this." Like, that's not how it works. So I
yeah,
appreciate you sharing that part. Yeah. It is a
yeah,
frustration and a misconception though, for sure.
yeah. And I just, I said, best case scenario, they provide her with resources, right? To like,
Right.
hopefully stop doing these kinds of things.
Hmm.
And it was just this back and forth, sort of fight argument. I mean, me and my stepdad we really um hit a wall, like butt heads when it comes to sort of a lot of things, but specifically like this, he has a very specific view of like 12-step programs and like asking for help and like getting help for, addictions and stuff like that. That's just the way he's always been. So, we've always viewed that completely different. So it's very, you know, rough and tumble argument that night. Essentially at one point I told my husband, like, let's just throw her up we'll pick her up and we'll just go on over to the hospital because like this is crazy. Like I don't know what we're doing right now. Like she's not coherent enough to even tell us what she's taken. Like
Wow.
so yeah, I mean it was a lot. It was a lot. And I just I was like physically blocked at one point by my stepdad, and I think I just sort of went to this like shut down. Like I'm not I'm not able to sort of like get this through to my parents, and like I don't know, at this point, like I'm like emotionally exhausted and like
Sure.
there's nothing I can do. I don't know. Um, but yeah, short of, throwing my stepdad to the side or punching him out, I don't see how we would have been able to get her out anyways. So finally I just gave up, and he was shouting, screaming like inches from my face. I mean, we were both shouting. I mean, I was shouting at him too. I was pissed. Um, but yeah, the last thing I said to him that night was, when she dies, I'm gonna blame you. And
Uh,
then I went to bed with my
good.
husband. Um, and then the next morning, just uh, typical fashion, sort of, at least with my parents and my family, you know, sort of brush it under the rug, like details are fuzzy because, people had been using substances the night before. So
Right.
it's like, oh, it was bad, but like, that just can't ever happen again, type of thing. Like, not like, oh, like, let's look into like, ways that you can like stop using drugs or treatment
But when you
options.
guys were having this conversation with your sister, like, was she articulating to you guys at all what she was using, or like, because was she sober the next morning? How was that part of this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think she was just very like remorseful, and she did not recall like any like, and so I actually had recorded her at one point, like just like when she was like nodding off, and like we'd ask her a question, then it would be like just, she would drop off and like not be talking anymore. So I had actually taken a video, right? Because she had a history of being like, oh, it wasn't that bad. Like, that didn't happen. So I was like, I just want to kind of have evidence. So, like, I showed it to her and she was like, oh my God, like, I don't remember this, and, I think it was really freaky for her. And I think she was just also remorseful, and she was worried about like getting in trouble and, not being allowed to hang out with certain people. I had like gone through her cell phone too. It's like I had seen that a friend had dropped off whatever it was. I believe it was, maybe, I'm not even going to say because I don't even remember, but he had dropped off whatever the drugs were she had been using on like my stepdad's tire of his car. And like I saw this text message exchange. It was
Very
from the night
specific.
before.
Yep,
Yeah,
very
like,
specific.
oh, it's on top of, the tire of the car in the driveway. And I'm like, like, what is this? So it was just sort of, there was no real like, we want you to like, go to some meetings or, do this, that, the other. I mean, it was just sort of very open ended. And I think for me, it was more open ended because I didn't live there, and my husband and I, we flew home the next day. So like we flew
Yeah.
home on the second. Um, so
I'm sure you felt so uneasy leaving that situation. I can't imagine. Like,
yeah, yeah,
I went
no,
through that with my brother too. It's very interesting that you filmed her, because I used to film my brother, and so did my other sister, when he
uh,
would be using and he wouldn't remember things and he would get
yeah,
violent and things like that. And it's not really something I've talked about a whole lot, but and then they see it back and it freaks them out. It really does.
yeah,
But I don't regret doing that, because I actually used that sidebar, I used that in therapy for myself. I was like, what is this behavior? Like, what is going on? Because I needed my therapist to tell me, like, yeah, he's using. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, based
yeah,
on my experience. Because we're so close to the situation that sometimes we're like, what is this? What is going on? So yeah, it's interesting that you did the same thing. And I'm sure there's a lot of you guys listening that are like, yeah, I've done that too, because we care.
yeah,
We care. But
yeah.
you fly back and I'm sure it was just like, oh, pit in your stomach. Like, oh,
Yeah, yeah, it was, again, it's just like and I think because of what happened, right? And like Corinda wasn't there, right? Corinda she had her own house, like lived with her husband. So she was very much removed, right, from that sort of experience on New Year's Eve night and like everything I went through and saw, and it was just crazy. Um, so yeah, I mean, we went back to Chicago, and I think again, oh, what I saw, and I think my reaction to it all, right, sort of uh made the communication, at least with, my parents, if anything was happening with Rihanna, like much, much less. And I think they didn't tell me a lot of things that had like happened up until, she passed away in May of 2015. Um, so yeah, I mean, and getting into that, I mean, my communication with her was, here and there. Oh, like Snapchat, text, call, phone call. I found out I was pregnant with our first daughter in March of 2015. So we did that whole little cute surprise, announcement thing where we like filmed everybody's reactions on FaceTime. And it was funny because Rihanna, she was like, "Oh my gosh, you're pregnant?" Like, what did she say? She was like, "Oh man, I'm gonna be an aunt. Like, I better get my SHIT together." And then I was
And
like,
you're like,
"Yeah,
"Yeah, girl, this is real."
do it."
Yeah, yeah.
um, but yeah, so I graduated from my master's program in May, early May. My birthday is May 8th. And my graduation, I think, was 2 days before. So it was this whole plan that, my sisters, my parents were going to come to my graduation, celebrate my birthday too, and just hang out in Chicago.
Yeah, so many exciting things, like you're pregnant, you're graduate, like, exciting
Yeah,
time for you. Yeah.
yeah. So my parents, they ended up not being able to come because they had a friend's wife pass away. And I was like, of course, like go. They had to travel to be with him, but I was like, yes, go be with him. Like, don't even worry about it. You can live stream my graduation if you want to. It's okay. So Corinda and Rihanna, some of my two sisters, they flew out. And stayed with well, actually, no, they stayed at a hotel. But anyway, so they came for like a very like I think it was like kind of a long weekend. So went to my graduation, celebrated my birthday. And then they left that Sunday. Um, yeah, flew back to Virginia. Which I guess that was Mother's Day because my birthday is always right around Mother's Day. So then, yeah, so then Wednesday, May 13th, that is the day Rihanna passed away.
So get
Sometime,
to back up for a second, Julia. When you saw her, when she came to your graduation and you guys, they stayed for that short time, were you noticing anything then that you had seen, months prior when you were there over the holidays? Like, did she seem like she was using? Did she seem like she was doing better? Like, what was your overall kind of, I mean, I know that was probably a chaotic time. Of course, graduation is always like
yeah,
chaotic and, it's exciting. But, like, did you notice anything? Because you were so, tuned into her, right?
yeah, like, and I think kind of like, I don't know, right the year before, like towards the end of it, the times, the family gatherings, at least that, even though when I was in Chicago, like that we did and everything, me and my older sister, sort of had this, like, I guess, I don't know, sort of not really an interrogation, but like, I don't know, it seemed like Rihanna was just like sick all of the time. Right. And it was always like a nasal thing. And it was always just like, that's weird. Like the last time I saw you, you were really sick and like, just,
Mhm.
yeah. So we, and I think it like bothered her, but like, I think she also knew that like when we were asking her about it, because we were really concerned, like you shouldn't be sick this much, like, are you going to your doctor? Like what's going on? Um, So, I mean, if anything, just like that, but like that sort of had become just the normal thing. Like Rihanna's just kind of got like a chronic, come to find out later, like, she had clearly
Okay.
been storing drugs for a very long time. But so, yeah. And I guess one other part that I didn't mention was that at one point in between that time that I was there New Year's Eve, and then Rihanna's passing, somewhere in there, Rihanna actually moved out of my parents' house and moved in with one of her best friends, Rachel. Um, and Rihanna I think she had just moved because when she was there in Chicago with us that weekend, she did bring up a couple of times how concerned she was about Rachel, you know, using and didn't really give us a lot of details. And, I guess me with my self-work hat, I was like, is she like, I don't know, like, is Rachel actually using or is she like projecting like what she's going through?
Interesting. Yeah.
Which come to find out, they were both using and they were both using, I think, pretty different drugs, if you will. So, that sounds super safe, to 23-year-olds living together in an apartment who both independent or, who both use, on a semi-regular basis, it appeared or seemed like.
Okay. Of
So that was very concerning, right, for me and Corinda to
course.
hear. And we were like,
Red flags
you
to
need to get
flying.
out of,
Like, yeah.
if this
Yeah.
is going on, like, you need to get out of there. Like, are Rachel's parents aware? Like, what can we do to help? Just like trying to brainstorm because it did not sound good. So, But yeah, so anyway, she was living with her friend. Her friend Rachel, I guess, woke up a little bit late, and I guess Rihanna didn't have a car, right? Because she totaled her car last year. So she borrowed Rachel's car frequently to drive to work. And I guess Rachel woke up and she was like, "Oh my gosh, like the time." And she ran into Rihanna's room to like, I guess, wake her up and be like, "Hey, you're late for work." And so she found Rihanna in her room, and she, I can't imagine like that. The one thing I have said to my mom, like, you know, I hate to say it, but I feel like we're all extremely lucky that like none of us had to see that, because
Yeah.
I don't think I'd wish that on anyone.
No.
And
I'm sure
um,
Rachel carries that very heavily with her. Yeah. Because that's tough.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, so how did you find out that day? We talk about this on the show, like every episode. Who I'm assuming Rachel called you, or was it a family member, or how was that? Tell us about that
yes.
part of the experience.
The call, like, oh my gosh, when I remember, like, I listened to your first episode and I was like, yes, the
That's
call.
our number one episode because,
It,
like,
oh my
besides
gosh, but
interviews,
it's
that's our
so
number one
true.
because everybody, and I can't tell you how many messages I've gotten from people, and they just tell me about their call, and I'm like, I hate getting them, and I love getting them at the same time because I
Yeah,
love that I open on such a relatable note for everybody, but I hate it because it breaks my heart. So you guys can
right.
still send me those messages, just disclaimer, but
Yeah,
it breaks my heart that so many people connected with it.
yeah,
So what was your call?
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it was my sister, I mean, and this is why, like, I don't know, it just started to feel like a movie at this point, like a really bad, like, movie, really bad. Because my sisters were just been in Chicago 3 days before with me, you
That's
know,
crazy. Yeah.
insane. So, like, we actually, my entire family, we went, all of us pretty much went a whole day without knowing. Because Rachel, I think once she actually called 911 and everything, because she woke up late. And when I say late, I mean like, I don't know, I'm pretty sure it was like 12 or like 1 p.m.
Sure.
And Rihanna had passed like probably around like 4 or something, like early morning hours, right? So I actually had been at my husband's grandma's funeral that day. We were like dealing with that. His two brothers were in town in Chicago for the funeral. So we had just, been dealing with all that all day. Um, and we had just gotten back to Dan's mom's place, and we were just sort of debriefing, and like Dan and I were about to leave, go back to like our apartment. And Corinda started FaceTiming me. Um, and I was like, oh, that's sweet. Like, cause she knew we were at the funeral. Like, I don't know, maybe she just wants to check in. I mean,
Yeah.
we FaceTimed a lot, whatever. So I answer it, um, and it's like she's like on the screen, and she's just like um silent, but like visibly distraught. And she couldn't even like form words. And then she handed the phone, like joke me up. She handed the phone to my brother-in-law, and he was like crying, and like this man is like stoic. So when I saw he was crying, I was like, sorry. I was like, oh man, like, um, my dad had been having a lot of health problems. So I immediately was like, oh, is it dad? Like, is something wrong with
You
dad?
associated with that. Mhm.
Yeah. Um, and like, I don't know, it was so weird, right? So it's like my cell phone screen, but then like both of their faces were like on, and then they both just like started shaking their heads no. And I was like, um, and they still weren't talking. So I was
Spit it out. What is
like,
going on?
dare
Yeah.
I dare I say it? I was like, it's Rihanna.
Wow.
Something happened to Rihanna. And then they were just like both like breaking down. And then I just knew, and I was like, Rihanna's dead. Rihanna died. Rihanna used drugs and she died. Um, yeah. Um,
And what did they just nod or said yes or
yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
Um, I think we were all just like
In
in
shock.
shock.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Well, like you said, like you've just all been together too. Like how like crazy is
yeah.
that? You know, it's
Yeah.
out of
It
body.
still blows my mind. Like, it doesn't make sense. Um, but yeah, so, and my parents, they were still in Georgia with their best friend whose wife had just passed away. Like, they were still there. Right. So, I mean, the whole thing was, Rachel contacted the police. I think the police tried to make contact with my parents, but they were not home. So they went to my sister's. So, like, sadly, my sister, you know, ended up taking on this role of like the informant, right?
I know
Which,
what that's like. Yep.
yeah, which,
Yep.
I mean, to be fair, in our family, if it were to be anyone, I mean, it's probably best if it's Corinda. But so, yeah, so that Corinda found out by the police. I don't know. I think Rachel was just too distraught. I mean, I think she immediately went to like her parents who were still local. And um, so yeah. And then, yeah, I don't know that it's all such a blur. I was also like 3 months pregnant.
Of
Um,
course. So
and
what happened? Did you go back home? Like, what happened next for you, Julia?
yeah, so I, I don't think I even slept that night, but I got like, I don't know, a 6 or 7 a.m. flight like the very next day. And then I ended up staying there for, I think, like a month. I mean, I had just graduated, right? And then all of this happened. And I was like, well, I'm definitely not starting. I wasn't really planning to start a new job just with, the baby coming in
Yeah.
October anyhow. So I don't know. It's really weird, right? How like timelines and things work like that. Like, it's almost like, oh, you like set yourself up for like the ability to go home for like a month. You know what I mean? It's really, really, really strange. How when you look back and you're like, interesting, because if that were to happen right now, like, there's no way I couldn't just like not work for a month, you know?
It is weird when you look back. I have similarities in my story, totally different, but similar at the same point that I was able to do certain things, and it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
So when you went back home, obviously you guys spent time and all of that. But you're there for a month. Walk us through kind of what that was like, and like, did you guys get a coroner's report? Like, how did you find out what she was taking? Like, how did that all transpire, Julia?
Yeah. Yeah. And like we were just kind of talking about like how like looking back, right? Because I just remember like the phone call with my sister, and when I finally got off the phone with my sister, um, and the first thing I thought of was like, oh my gosh, that conversation, like New Year's Eve. Like, did I like make
Yeah.
this happen? Like, I don't know. It was very eerie, super eerie. So like, and I don't know, that night, like that's all I could think about. Like, and like, oh my gosh, like I said that, and then this happened. I can imagine how my parents are feeling right now. Like the guilt, just and like just losing a daughter. Like I can't imagine. Like I'm pregnant with my first right now. Like, oh my gosh, like this is the worst thing that's ever happened. Um. So yeah, I mean, I remember calling my mom, and again, they were still in Georgia. They were making plans at that point, you know, obviously to come back immediately. And I called my mom once my husband and I got back to our apartment, and I knew I don't know, it's almost like I didn't want to call because, like, I don't know, like, what do I even say? This is my sister, but it's her daughter. I think it's that sort of weird thing with grief. Not that like siblings are forgotten. I mean, I feel like sometimes we are, right, in our
Well,
grief.
we definitely are, but I think it's a case by case situation, right? Because
Right.
you
Like
guys were
just
very tight knit, so you
yeah.
probably, especially you and your older sister probably felt like you had each other, but we're just forgotten in the scheme of grief, right? So,
Yeah.
we do it to ourselves, which I think is kind of what you're saying, because like
Right. Yeah.
we do it
Like
to ourselves because we prioritize our parents and other people. So we are also guilty of it too.
no, that's so true. It's like, okay, well, I've got to like hold myself together because
Totally.
like I've got to be there for mom. Like, oh my gosh, it's her daughter. But yeah, I have to remind myself like she's my sister,
Yeah.
and it's okay that I've got this pain too.
Mhm.
Like there's not. I remember having so many conversations too with like my mom about this, like that it's like it's not like one is hurting more than the other, right? Like we have different experiences because she was your daughter, but like she was my sister, and like we can both acknowledge each other's grief and pain. Like, it doesn't have to be this, like, who's more sad or who's grieving the most, and I feel like at a lot of times it would get sort of to that place, and it was just not. I was like, no, like, this is not how this isn't how this works. Like, we're supposed
That's
to
very unhealthy, and it's much
each other.
healthier to describe it and experience it the way that you described first, right? Like,
Yeah.
yes, we're both experiencing this. It's different. Comparison is, you know, I've had an amazing guest on in the past, and she's written a book, and she said, comparison is the thief of grief, and I love that, and I think it's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So
yeah, that whole just like month, I mean, it was just, I think everybody was just like angry. I mean, my parents, they were really wanting to just find somebody to like blame, and at first it was like, it was like Rachel. And then it was like, what are the police doing about this to find the drug dealer that sold these drugs to her? And, I kept in my own, little way, just like as a daughter, as like a social worker, I was just like, you know, we can try to find somebody to blame all we want, but like,
So you're wearing all these hats naturally, right? As
yeah,
daughter, sister, social worker. And of course, that's a normal, and I appreciate you bringing that up too, Julia, because that's a really normal part too, is where we want to blame other people. And trust me, there's a lot of situations where, yes, but that's not going to do anything in the moment, to your point, right? She's gone. Like,
right,
that's how, and you're being kind of the one with the level head in the
right,
situation.
yeah.
But you guys are going through all of this, over this month. Like, when did you get some answers? That's what we're always looking for, right?
Yeah, and like I remember, shortly after, right, like a detective came by to my mom's house to talk with us, and I think, you know, the preliminary tox report, right, I want to say it was like cocaine and fentanyl was like clearly in her system.
Wow.
So, it was very clear from the get that like, okay, maybe she had been doing cocaine regularly, but like clearly this time it was laced with fentanyl, which is ultimately, the cause of her death. And it was, I think my mom just had a lot of questions, that he really couldn't answer, and they had her cell phone and the text messages and like, oh, we have a lead with who she might have met up with, but that really didn't go anywhere. It was like a burner phone. And it's like, I don't know. I think it's one of those situations like bigger fish to fry. I don't really know.
Well, and also to your point that we talked about earlier this episode, fentanyl was so new, right? And maybe not necessarily new, but just new to the drug world and to cops and investigators. And like, now it's like we're bringing more awareness to it. I'm glad you and I are having this conversation about it today. And it's, but it was still kind of unknown. So I'm sure there was a lot of that on their side too. And you sharing the facts and stats earlier, like, this was not known. Like,
Yeah.
we didn't know much about it. We just knew it was a thing. Like, that was kind of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing too, I know I had mentioned earlier about, people like being afraid to like go in and, seek help or whatever, being afraid, right, of like repercussions.
Yeah.
And like I know since at least since 2015, like many states have like passed laws, right, where, if you're even with a person, right, and whether you're using, you're not, it doesn't matter. Like if you are using, if you have drugs on you, you can contact 911, and you're not going to be prosecuted, whether you're using or not, which I think has also been a very positive thing for
I think
people
so
because
too.
a lot of
I
people
think so
are
too.
terrified,
They're
if you're like
scared.
at a, yeah, like totally. So, and I think a lot of people don't know that still. So I think like just making sure people understand, like, you're not going to get in trouble if you call
Right.
911 and save somebody's life. So,
That was, and I connect with this part of your story because that was something that was just so frustrating. I can't tell you how many times we had cops come to the house, and like, I've shared some of that, and I think I'll share more of it as I continue on. But in my season 1, I shared a little bit, but it was such a difficult situation because we had cops come to the house and they wanted to take my brother like for a 72-hour hold or take him into, like, they wanted to, and my mom would always be like, no, no, and he was an adult, and so like, it
wow.
just, there wasn't
Yeah.
much we could do because she was covering for him. And like, but it all, like, I have a lot more empathy for her now because I understand, very similar to your parents, that it was coming from a place of fear, and they don't understand that it's more progressive now. Like, you're not going to jail. Like, they're not looking for like people that are using drugs. They're looking for the people that are distributing it. They're looking for the people that are creating these problems, right? Like, if you're using, like, you have an illness, like you have an addiction, like this needs to be treated more and more like how we've gotten a little bit better at mental health, how we're definitely really tuned into helping if our bodies are sick or if we're in an ailment
Yeah.
in that way. It's the same thing, right? It's the same thing. And I think that is refreshing that we're starting to see that change too. But yeah, it's the fear that holds people back. So I
Yeah.
appreciate you talking about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this, or if your sibling is going through this, like, that's a great thing to communicate, because I have a lot of people that listen to the show or are on TikTok, as you probably seen, Julia, where they're like, I
Yeah.
haven't lost my sibling yet, but I feel like I've lost them to addiction. How do I help them? And that's a great opening conversation, and coming from a place of empathy and love, where it's like, look, you're not going to get in trouble. Like, let's go talk to someone. Like, you're not, unless they're the ones dealing fentanyl, which is a whole other ball game. So I'm not the one to help you on that, guys, but this is a
Yeah.
conversation that I think is really great and positive, and can be some tools in your belt to go have those conversations with your sibling or loved one that's struggling with this.
Yeah.
Julia, that's a lot. That's a big story, and a lot happening in a very short period of time. And also, you were at a funeral too. I mean, it's very interesting, the incredible siblings that come on the show, because it seems like a lot always happens around the time of loss. It's interesting in life how that is. But um Julia, now, I mean, your work, like, you worked in social work, like, you have that's like what I think is fascinating about your story too, is like you have experience with this, and I really like your messaging around all of this as well. Tell us a little bit about, tell us about your grief journey now, because you can talk about this so eloquently and well. Tell us, like, how you're kind of continuing to advocate for Rihanna. I think you kind of told us a little bit today. And then also kind of close us out and tell us anything maybe that we missed talking about here, a piece of advice you would give maybe yourself back in 2014 and 2015, right? Or something that you could give to siblings that are going through the type of loss that you went through, to close us out today.
Yeah. Yeah. Starting with like the advice piece first. I mean, right, for me, I think, well, one, just move Greg out of the way. My stepdad. Uh, but number two, I think just giving yourself as much grace as possible. I mean, it's so traumatic. Um, you know, Loss is a very hard thing to go through, especially when it's such, like, just sudden, unexpected, and I don't know, especially for me, I know in my experience, like losing Rihanna, it was it was not something in my head, we were supposed to grow up and, be old ladies together.
Yeah.
Like, you don't, I think, and expect, right? One day, right? Like your grandparents, your parents, they're older than you. Like, yes, they're going to pass eventually one day down the road. Your sibling who's like 2 years younger than you, like, that's just
You
no.
kind of
Like,
already have it in your head that you're going to go first. That's how I was with my brother. I was like, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. I mean, give or take. When you're older, it might happen different, but you don't think that's a whole other
right.
podcast, right? Yeah.
And it's just a very interesting kind of loss and grief, right? Because it's like, you continue living your life, like I have two daughters now, and they've never met her. I mean, they know about her, they know her picture, they know her name, we talk about her. But yeah, it's just all the things in life that you grow up and you do, and you're like, dang, she's not here, So it's hard. And then they're just kind of frozen, right, in time at this like age. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think just being kind to yourself and, talking about it and, finding resources like this is always comforting. I mean, I think just being able to connect with other people that have been through what you've been through is so important, because I remember feeling like just very alone at 25, 3 months pregnant, lost my little sister,
Yeah.
and a month later, my dad died too. So like,
Wow.
super traumatic 2015 for me as a 25-year-old. But yeah, I just talk and talk as much as you can, as often as you can to those that like love you and are okay listening, right? Because like it's just there's no I don't know. I don't feel like there's any like graduation or like, step by step like linear process, right? To like getting over grief. It's always there. It changes and it gets different over time, but like it's not, it's always gonna be there, but and that's okay. Like I said, it gets different, but
Yeah.
it's not gonna be this like gut wrenching, like hysterically sobbing if I talk about it type of thing, like you eventually get but I still hysterically sob sometimes. And that's
Right.
okay
Well,
too.
I love that you said that because I think it's so scary for people in the beginning, right? Because they're like,
Yeah.
"Oh my God, holy crap, I'm gonna feel like this every day of my life." And you don't, to your point. But like even today on the episode, like you got really emotional when we talked about that
Yeah.
specific moment. And that's normal and that's okay. And like thanks
Yeah.
for normalizing that stuff in this episode. And I just want to highlight one thing really fast and then we'll talk about where people can connect with you, where you're comfortable, Julia.
Yeah.
But I loved that you said about giving yourself grace because for me, when people started saying that to me in the beginning, like people that really were coming from a genuine place, I love that you said talk about it with people. Like that's how you're really going to know who your friends are too. Just sidebar, like we can attest to
Yep.
this, right? Like the people, like don't be afraid. A lot of people always say like, oh, people are so sick of me talking about. That's not your friend then. That's not your friend. Like this can be a gift for you. You can see who really, really freaking cares about you. But the giving yourself grace thing, I used to be like, what does that even mean? Like, what are people talking about? So I love that you shared that because for me, that was an evolution. I had to learn what giving myself grace was. It didn't mean like going and sitting in, a spa and like putting cucumbers on my eyes and like taking the day off. No, it meant like, you know what? Today, the best thing I can do is take a shower and brush my teeth. That's cool. That's cool.
Yep.
That was giving myself grace. I think sometimes we have this like big image of giving ourselves grace. Giving ourselves grace is saying, if I didn't do anything today except brush my teeth or take a shower, or maybe I actually did a load of laundry, win.
Yeah.
That's giving
Totally.
myself grace. So
Yeah.
I love that you
Yeah.
brought.
And I think, with what I went through and like, I've had people lose, grandparents and stuff like that. Some couple of parents lost maybe
Yeah.
here and there, whatever. But I don't know when this happened and just with sort of the bam, bam, bam with like, my sister and my dad, I think it's almost sort of like helped a lot of my people, like my friends and family, when they have experienced a loss, whatever the loss is, whether it's a parent, grandparent, they'll come to me and be like, oh my gosh, like, I'm so sorry. Like, I had no idea. And like,
Isn't it funny how they come
you
back
lost your
around?
sister
Yes.
and I'm like, it's okay. But now but also like, yeah,
Isn't
like
that
that's,
weird? Yeah. How'd that happen?
but
Your friends will come to you and they're like, I can't believe that, I just lost my parent. I just lost my, and they're like, how did you go through that? And it,
yeah,
it, it creates a level of empathy in people. And they don't understand it until they go through it. And I don't wish it on anybody, but it's just a different level. So it's interesting you
yeah,
brought that up. Yeah.
yeah. I've had a lot of friendships, in the past few years that have just really kind of like strengthened, which is like such a sad and strange thing, right?
It
Like, but I've
is.
had friends that have lost parents in the past few years, and like those friendships have just like flourished and like just they've become some of the closest people to me, because they just I don't know, they get it and they know that I get it. So like I'm just gonna do my Julia thing and show up and you don't have to say anything. You can scream, you can cry, you can do whatever because like I get it. So that's been
You're
like
a
a very
safe space
cool
for them. Yeah,
yeah,
you're a safe
it's been a
space.
very cool experience.
Yeah.
So
Julia, thank you so much for sharing all of that. It's been amazing hearing your story, and I'm so sorry you lost your father as well. That's a lot, a lot of compounding grief happening there for you, and so you
yeah.
really do get it. No one, you're the safe place for your friends for sure, like to come to.
Yeah.
So tell us where you're comfortable with people connecting with you. If they obviously there's going to be a lot of people that connect with your story, so tell us where you're most active on social media and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So on Instagram, I am at it's Julia Phil. So my last name is F as in Frank, ILL, not like Dr. Phil. A lot of people make that mistake. And then that's Instagram, and then TikTok. My handle is Julia Self.
Perfect. We'll put it in the show notes too so people can connect with you. Thank you so much for sharing all of that today with us.
Yeah,
And thank you for sharing your knowledge also, just, from your perspective as a social worker and your background. I think that's super helpful as well. And just kind of the signs that you saw with Rihanna. And thank you for sharing Rihanna with us.
Thank you so much for listening to the Surviving Siblings podcast. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did creating it for you, then share it on your chosen social media platform. And don't forget to tag us at Surviving Siblings Podcast so that more surviving siblings can find us. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Surviving Siblings Podcast. All links can be found in the show notes, so be sure to check those out too. Thank you again for the support. Until the next episode, keep on surviving, my surviving siblings.